All right, Gentry, we're going to talk a little bit about Tennessee today, but mostly about South Carolina. Let's put Tennessee away, first of all. Right away, the impression of that game, any inkling that some South Carolina or some Georgia players, that is, were starting to peak a little bit ahead around midway through the second quarter there?
I don't think it was that as much as Georgia had some things to work out defensively, certainly. They were playing a very, very good offense, in particular a very good offensive line that handled Georgia up front as well as anybody has in a while on the defensive front. And I think that also getting Rainbow and Ogletree back changed some things personnel-wise.
Cohesion a little bit, slightly.
A few changes. I mean, you saw Jenkins and Gathers together up front on the defensive line a lot. You saw Marlo Herrera play a new position of Mike at inside linebacker. Those are things Georgia had to work through, and they were doing it against an offense that had a lot of teeth and the ability to hurt them, and they did at times.
First time that offense faced real adversity, kind of its own doing, since the Missouri game at least, but even much more so. It was one mistake after another that kind of built upon itself, and I thought it was that drive to get in position for Marshall Morgan's field goal tied at the half was big, but I think it was just more important. It was important to get to the half, to get in the locker room, to stem that tide and kind of collect themselves. And they did reassert their will in the second half.
Yeah, and I think the yardage would have indicated in the first half that Georgia got the better of that game. It was just a few key mistakes, and obviously you can't do that, but they were able to overcome it, and that's now 2 games, counting Missouri, that there was a lot of adversity there, and Georgia kind of had to stay out of its own way a little bit, and they were able to survive.
Worry about the Georgia defense if you're the Georgia coaches or a Georgia fan right now? Is that, I mean, we knew that Tennessee was going to not get shut out with that offense, but they were able to run the ball too. That was the thing that was surprising.
I think it was surprising a little bit, but I think a lot of it had to do with their offensive line. Tennessee's offensive line was very good, and Georgia had a hard time dealing with it. They will not play an offensive line this year better than that group, and I think that if I'm Georgia going into this game, I think it's a good thing they had that experience, because I think that Tennessee's offense was a real challenge. On the flip side, Tennessee's defense wasn't very good at all. Georgia was able to pretty much do what they wanted for 3/4 of that game, as long as they weren't turning the ball over. And I think, you saw the impact on the scoreboard, and that's why they were able to win.
We'll see whether it was just kind of lip service, but the thing you kept hearing from people, and Todd Grantham was the first person I talked to that said this, was that Tennessee game reminded them of the South Carolina game last year, the pinball quality, and the difference is this time they were able to finish it off. I think it's easy to say in retrospect when you actually win that game that, this year's team is different, because last year we had that kind of game and we lost. South Carolina last year is better than Tennessee this year, I'm sure, but it'll be interesting to watch that. That transitions us to South Carolina. As a lot of people know, I covered South Carolina for 5 years, and Gentry informed me before the telecast that you had some questions.
Well, I'm curious.
For me,
South Carolina is still – they've had a good run the last few years, but in terms of college football and the national stage, they're still kind of new money. And I think
good term.
I'm just curious how you think this game is going to play in Columbia. I mean, how big a deal is this?
Oh, I remember Ole Miss came in, I want to say it was 2007, 2008. It must have been Houston Nutt's first year. Jevin Sneed was the quarterback. Ole Miss was number 4 in the country. Came into Williams-Rice for a Thursday night game. And South Carolina beat them pretty handily. And then you didn't really hear about Ole Miss much after that. That was a big game. This one, I think there's a little bit more built-in respect for Georgia and what they are. You're still going to have some people carp and say, well, Georgia's not that good. They haven't really beaten anybody. Their offense is just doing it against bad defenses. Their defense is blah, 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 blah. But I think for both programs, for South Carolina and Georgia, this is an important game for the programs, not in the sense that the programs are going to fall over and die if they lose or go to the BCS if they win, but South Carolina wants to stay where they are. Like you said, they're new money. They want to stay there. If they get knocked off by Georgia here, then there's still going to be this sense of still not there. May never get there. If Georgia doesn't win this game, then South Carolina has beaten them 3 years in a row for the first time ever, and at this point is past them a little bit in the East.
From a scheduling standpoint, obviously this is massive in the SEC East for both teams, but I think if you're drawing a distinction, it may be a little more important for South Carolina just because they have that stretch after this where they have to play LSU, Florida, and Tennessee. I mean, that's a tough run right there. I'm not sure anybody could get through that.
A little bit of that is mitigated. I said before the year started that I thought the most likely result was the same as last year, which is Georgia loses this game but still wins the division because of the schedule. But a lot of that's mitigated by Florida emerging the way they have. South Carolina and Georgia still both have to play Florida. Georgia before.
And they both have to
South
play
Carolina.
Florida in the state of Florida.
Yeah, yeah, and true road game for South Carolina, some would say, including Mark Richt, the road game for Georgia. What do you think? There's so many things we can talk about Gentry in terms of the X's and O's of this matchup, and we're going to beat it to death on your website, dogs247.com, and my many websites, macon.com, yada, yada, yada. So many potential storylines. Will Georgia be able to stop Marcus Lattimore? Is Georgia's offense, are the tailbacks going to be able to run on South Carolina the way they have? What about Aaron Murray and the passers? What about Georgia stopping Jadeveon Clowney and Devin Taylor? So many storylines. What are the ones that stick out?
The Georgia's offensive line against South Carolina's defensive front, I think that will decide the game. And that right there, because Georgia's offensive line has what some would say overachieved this year. They played real well, and they weren't expected to going into this year, especially after the spring, and we heard how bad it was, and they've really held it together. They've called good systematic plays that plays to the strength of this offensive line.
Right. They've schemed around a lot of it.
They're quick.
Aaron
They get out on
Murray
the edge well.
throwing it a lot quicker.
Maybe not physically imposing, but they are quick and they get out there. Now, this is a completely different challenge. I think you could say the 5 teams Georgia have played to this point were not terribly imposing on the defensive front. Well, this team is.
Yeah.
South Carolina has arguably the best defensive front in the
Can't
conference,
roll
except maybe
protection
LSU
to
or
one side on
Alabama.
Clowney because then Devin Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to protect Murray. Can you keep him upright?
Yeah.
And can you run the ball against this group? Can you get to the edge against a team that's going to be able to get a good bit of push on you? And I think the game hinges on that. Stopping Lattimore, obviously, is a big deal for Georgia's defense.
That's what I
as
say
well.
is the biggest deal. I say if you can stop Lattimore, which they haven't done the last 2 years, and it was worse in 2010, then that creates so many other problems for South Carolina. The thing is, though, that Connor Shaw, and I remember covering South Carolina spring practice when Connor Shaw enrolled early when he was playing behind Steven Garcia. He's a guy that has a knack for knowing when to take off and run. There's guys like Garcia, Michael Vicks of the world, whatever, who run just for the sake of running. Shaw is a guy that he'll know when the play's breaking down and he'll run, so he can still hurt you. But I think they don't have Alshon Jeffrey the way they did last year. They've still got some tall receivers, but they don't have studs out there. And if you're able to mitigate Lattimore, if you're able to keep him at 60, 65, 70 yards, something like that, you're taking a huge chunk out of what that offense can do.
Well, Connor Shaw impressed me a lot in the Vanderbilt game to start the season. That was a very gritty performance. He was banging. He was hurt in that game, and I don't think South Carolina would have won the game without him coming back and playing through the pain the way he did. And he's a gamer. He's a very tough kid, and I think he will be a handful, like you said. I think he'll know when to run. I think he's been very accurate throwing the ball the last few weeks. Surprisingly so, really.
He just seems to have that right feel. He's not the tallest guy. I don't know that Georgia ever recruited him for many reasons, even though he's from Flowery Branch. But he has that. He knows the right thing to do. But I still don't think Connor Shaw wins this game for South Carolina on offense. It's still Lattimore.
I think Georgia's defense will play pretty well in this game. I think they got the kinks worked out. They have a game in Tennessee that they're going to learn from with a full complement of players. They tried out a lot of things against Tennessee. They really.
Is that why there were the run troubles? I mean, because that's what worries you if you're Georgia is the front seven should have been able to do much better against Tennessee, and if Tennessee was able to run the ball, then why won't Marcus Lattimore?
Well, here's the thing. John Jenkins was playing defensive end for a majority of that game. They put him and Gathers in there together. Gathers was the nose. They moved Jenkins outside. He wasn't used to playing that position, and he looked a little out of sorts most of the game. Now, what else you do in that game was put a Marlo Herrera as the Mike linebacker for the first time.
Played him and Ogletree.
That Mike linebacker position is significant because you call signals before the play. And especially in the first half, you saw a lot of instances where Georgia was a little slow to get into position, guys looking around, not knowing the call. And I think that probably had to do with the fact that you kind of had a new field general out there. He will have that game under his belt now. If they try to do that again, I think they're going to be a lot better. I think Ogletree is going to be a lot more seasoned. He was a little rusty at times. He had 14 tackles. And
Rambo looked a lot more rusty.
Yeah, and the two, I mean, they played pretty well. They're both really athletic, and they made a difference in the game. But I think that they'll be a lot better this week than they were last week. So I think Georgia's defense will be pretty good. But the big question is, can the offense keep doing what they're doing against what is certainly the best defense they've played?
We could talk about this game for a while, but we try to keep all these these videos are about 10 minutes because it's number 5 or this is number 6. We'll go slightly over 10 minutes, but not very much slightly, as you can probably tell by the bar going across your screen right now. Just quick closing thought. When the line came out, South Carolina favored by 2.5, and usually the home team gets 3. I said that's about right. I still see this as a toss-up. I would, if I had to pick right now, I'd still say South Carolina just purely because of home field advantage. But the way Georgia's offense is playing is giving me some pause on that. Gentry,
I don't want to pick right now. I want to give it a week. I want to just get a feel for what's going on around Georgia's program this week. And I mean, I've usually said in the past that when I'm torn on a game is a genuine toss-up, which this kind of looks that way to me.
Yeah.
You lean towards the home team, but I think that there's a lot to this game, and there's a lot we don't know about Georgia and South Carolina to this point.
It seems to me, and I may be a little prejudiced by covering Georgia, but it seems that Georgia has a little bit more left to show in terms of a higher ceiling, especially when it comes to its defense, than South Carolina may at this point. Georgia struggling a little bit at times on defense, but its offense on full gear. We didn't really predict it being that way in the preseason.
One thing about Georgia's offense in this game too, they're not going to have to score 50 points. I think in this one,
I don't know.
But they're going to have to protect the ball.
Yeah.
And not make key mistakes. That's what cost them the game against South Carolina last year, and in a way, the 2010 game as well. There was a key turnover in that game too with Sean Ely, and I think that if Georgia is able to play sound, not beat themselves, and that's the big thing. They went to Missouri, almost beat themselves. They went to Tennessee, they almost beat themselves. They've got to stay out of their own way. If they're able to do that and play the complete game, which a lot of people thought Vanderbilt was, then they're going to be tough to beat. They've got a lot of weapons they can throw at you, and they can do these things. But South Carolina is going to do a lot defensively to disrupt what Georgia's doing. They're going to really hit them in the mouth, and how's Georgia going to respond to that?
Honestly, I wanted to keep this to 10 minutes. It's his fault. I mean, if you break down this video, you can see how much he's talking and I'm talking, I'm sure.
Well, are you looking forward to going back to Columbia this weekend?
Yeah. I'm going to take the wife to my old haunts. And we shouldn't be talking about this on camera. All right. Talk to you all later.